Hello and welcome to another episode of Soap Goes to the Oscars. This is episode 86. I'm recording on May 13th, 2025. I also watched the movie today. This movie was called Alexander's Ragtime Band, 1938 film. This one I had to rent on Fandango Now. When I originally searched for this one, it said it was available on Amazon, but I could not find it on there today. So luckily, it was available on Fandango because I did. There's another movie called Test Pilot that originally said it was available on Amazon, but it's not available anywhere. So I had to buy that one on DVD for $15. So that changed my average movie price from like $1.80 to $4.18. So took a jump there, but that's still not bad. So anyway, Alexander's Ragtime Band is a 1938 American musical film released by 20th Century Fox that takes its name from the 1911 Irving Berlin song Alexander's Ragtime Band to tell the story of a society boy who scandalizes his family by pursuing a career in ragtime instead of serious music. The film generally traces the history of jazz music from the popularization of ragtime in the early years of the 20th century to the acceptance of swing as an art form in the late 1930s using music composed by Berlin. The story spans more than 2 decades from the 1911 release of its namesake song to some point in time after the 1933 release of Heatwave, presumably 1938. It stars Tyrone Power, Alice Faye, Don Amici, Ethel Merman, Jack Haley, and Jean Hersholt. Several actual events in the history of jazz are fictionalized and adapted to the story, including the tour of Europe by original Dixieland Jazz Band, the global spread of jazz by U.S. soldiers during World War I, and the 1938 Carnegie Hall performance by the Benny Goodman Orchestra. The story was written by Berlin himself with Catherine Scola, Richard Sherman, and Lamar Trotti. In 1944, a federal judge ruled that most of the story by Berlin and collaborating writers had been plagiarized from a 1937 manuscript by author Marie Dykhuis, but that decision was reversed on appeal. Alexander's Ragtime Band was 20th Century Fox's highest-grossing film of the 1930s and was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, winning the award for Best Music Scoring. It was nominated for Best Picture, Story, Song, Art Direction, and Film Editing. Produced by Daryl F. Zanuck, cinematography J. Peverill Marley, edited by Barbara McLean, music by Irving Berlin and Alfred Newman, distributed by 20th Century Fox, released August 5th, 1938, was a New York premiere, and a runtime of 106 minutes. One thing I will say that, it says it takes place over that span of time. The one sort of gripe I have with it is that none of the actors looked like they aged today. They looked exactly the same in the beginning as they did at the end. So it was a little confusing as to the time span because of that. But Don Amici, I had seen his name like on the poster art when I rented it, but then forgot about it. And the whole movie, I was like, he looks so familiar. And then I looked up, I was like, holy crap, it's Don Amici. And he was in another, actually, the 3 lead actors, Tyrone Power, Alice Faye, and Don Amici, were all in Old Chicago, which I watched for the last round, I think. And he's just completely different than he was when he was older. He was so much thinner in older age that he's just unrecognizable to me. Ethel Merman was the same thing. I was watching her and I was like, she looks familiar, and then looked at her and saw that she was Ethel Merman. Tyrone Power kept looking familiar to me. And again, he was in Old Chicago, so I'd seen him in something else. But I finally realized about halfway through that he really looks a lot like Wes Bentley, who's in American Beauty, amongst other things. But this one was pretty good. I tuned out a little bit in the middle when he went off to World War I. It's sort of a romance film, so it goes through all the sort of tropes where they don't like each other and then they like each other, and then something happens where they split up, and then she gets married to Don Amici, who is like his best friend when the main guy was off at war. But Don Amici knows that she doesn't really love him, so they get divorced later. And when she goes to find Alec, he's with the Ethel Merman character, but not married. And then, so in the end, it all works out. They end up together. Spoilers, but it's a lot of that back and forth, and a lot of time with them spent apart in the second half of the movie, or probably more than half the movie. But it was pretty good. Like I said, I did tune out a little bit in the middle. I just sort of lost focus, but not because of the movie, really. That's just me. But overall, this was pretty good. I like this quite a bit. The music was good, and I did recognize it in the description there. It mentioned the 1933 release Heat Wave, which is something I sing the beginning of all the time. We're having a heat wave, tropical heat wave, because it was in Grumpy Old Men. Walter Matthau sings it, but I had never knew the original song, but got to hear it here, so that was fun. 1937, composer Irving Berlin had been approached by 20th Century Fox to write a story treatment for an upcoming film entitled Alexander's Ragtime Band. Berlin agreed to write a story outline for the film, which would feature many of Berlin's signature tunes. Released on August 5th, 1938, Alexander's Ragtime Band was a smash hit with audience engrossed in excess of $5 million. However, soon after, a plagiarism lawsuit was filed by author Marie Cooper Dykhouse against Berlin and 20th Century Fox. In 1944, a federal judge ruled in Dykouse's favor that Berlin and collaborating writers had plagiarized the 1937 manuscript by Dykhouse and used many of its elements. In 1937, Dykhouse had submitted her manuscript to various Hollywood studio heads, literary agents, and other individuals for their perusal. The trial court ruled that much of her manuscript's plot was included in the film's screenplay. However, in 1946, this ruling was reversed on appeal because there was no evidence that Berlin and the others who worked on the film had ever seen Dykouse's manuscript. Gotta wonder, though, if they were sort of given those elements by someone who had seen it, the manuscript. Oh, and also John Carradine made a sort of a cameo as a taxi driver in the end. He of the Carradine family. So yeah, this one was pretty good. Liked it, and there's not too much more info in here. I don't have a whole lot more to say, but I did enjoy it. So hoping that, like, I'm trying to get back into the swing of, no pun intended, the swing of doing this. So I've got 4 more movies total for this round of Oscars. Hoping to get through them sooner rather than later. So we'll see how it goes. See you next time.